Okay, in terms of the stuff, deadlines remain unchangeable. So, quizzes part 1, deadline September 21st, this Friday, then today. Exam 1, quizzes part 2, October 19th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, November 16th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, December 7th, a day that shall live in infamy. And exam number 5, the final deadline is December 13th at 5 p.m. Again, all the stuff's available online from day 0. Just be sure to completify it before deadlines. For the paper, draft deadline, November 9th, +5 deadline, November 14th, emergency deadline, November 21st, and desperation deadline, December 8th, the day after the day that shall live in infamy. Also, of course, Wednesday I've got the Institutional Level Effectiveness Committee meeting at 2, hence no class. So we'll resume our normal classing on Friday. Before pressing on to the new stuff, namely finishing up the apology, or heading to finish the apology, anything about any previous stuff that needs more stuff? Okay, so last time we were looking at the paper, and we saw it's a four-part paper, introduction, summary, argument, conclusion, covering the horse trainer analogy and the unintentional argument. Before going to more apology, anything about the paper that needs more stuff? Okay, so in the paper, in the previous part, we're looking at the charge of Socrates being the corrupter of the youth. And he says, that he turns the charge to being the sole corrupter, uses the horse trainer analogy to try to show he can't be the sole corrupter, and then he changes the charge to being intentional corrupter and claims either he did not corrupt the youth or did so unintentionally. Now, another charge against Socrates was the religious charge. And the claim was against Socrates that he taught new divinities, new gods that were not the gods of the city of Athens. And so, once again, Socrates used his Socratic method approach and asked Miletus a series of questions. And so, he asked Miletus, does he, Socrates, believe in some gods or not? And Socrates, or the alternative is, he believes in some gods, or does he believe in gods that the city doesn't recognize? So what exactly is the charge? Well, Miletus ends up modifying the original charge, because he starts off saying, teaching people to believe in foreign gods, and then the question Socrates raises is, well, is he an atheist or not? Because someone's like a complete atheist, how many gods do they believe in? Yeah, 0. Now, interestingly, a person can be an atheist about different gods. For example, most people today are atheists about, say, Zeus or Quetzalcoatl or Talic. They don't believe that those gods exist. But someone who's a complete atheist doesn't believe in any at all. So Miletus claims Socrates is an atheist, total across the board, doesn't believe in any gods, and teaches people atheist. But he also has claimed that Socrates is teaching about spiritual things and things relating to, the gods. So not surprisingly, he catches Miletus in a seeming contradiction. Now, we often toss around the term, contradiction. We meet people who are saying one thing and say something else that doesn't necessarily fit to it. But strictly speaking, to contradict oneself means what? Logically, what would be a contradiction? Yeah, it's such that a strict contradiction, logically, would be that one of them's got to be true, the other's got to be false. In a normal usage, we often talk about someone contradicting themselves. We just mean that, they said one thing and they say something that, they deny that thing later. So, what's the problem that Miletus makes? Well, what Socrates does is brings forth another analogy. No, he does throw in some horses, but it's not specifically like a horse trainer analogy, but he makes an analogy. Now, Miletus is claiming Socrates is an atheist, but at the same time, he also believes in divine agencies, spiritual agencies, demigods, and heroes. So Meletus wants to maintain both of those things. Socrates is a total atheist, but Socrates also is teaching people about divine agencies, spirits and demigods, etc. Now, and so how does he run the analogy? Well, he brings up 3 analogies for the price of 1. Now, could someone believe in stuff created by humans, but then say, things like, I believe in the Brooklyn Bridge, and I believe in FAMU, and I believe in, Cheetos, humans, total fabrication. I'm a human, anti-human, yes, there are no, I don't know what the term would be, human atheists, no humans. Would that make any sense? No, because if a person believes in all the stuff that humans have made, like Cheetos and so forth, and then say there are no humans, would be, well, I mean, maybe some of the future people would say, yeah, there are these humans that made all this stuff, and they all were killed by robots in 2024. Yeah, that's fine. But to say that they're, to believe in human stuff and say there are no humans would be a contradiction. Similarly, if someone said, yes, of course, there's, horsemanship, riding of horses, and there's like dressage, which I learned during when Mitt Romney was running for president, is of course horse dancing, horse ballet. Dressage is horse ballet. And the only reason I know that is because Mitt Romney owned, maybe he still does, owned a dressage horse in the Made in the News. And so, because he was trying to relate to people, and people had a hard time relating to owning a horse that danced. Well, that'd be kind of cool, a dancing horse. Talking horse cooler, dancing horse pretty good. Now, could one believe in horsemanship like dressage and not horses? Say, yeah, there's a Kentucky Derby, but I don't believe in those horse things. Total fabrication. Yeah, that'd be weird. Why are they racing the Kentucky Derby? They have cats or something. The Kentucky Derby. That'd be weird. Similarly, like flute playing. That flutes are played, but there are no flute players. Now, so Socrates accused of believing in certain things, but not believing in the gods. Now, kind of the main point here is thinking about like demigods. And in mythology, demigods is like, those like gods, demigods are the children of gods and mortals, like Hercules, for example, the classic Hercules, father of Zeus, and so, kind of God, but not entirely God. So if someone believes in demigods, they'd have to believe in, the gods. It'd be like, he also uses the analogy, if someone believed in mules, but did not believe in horses or donkeys. But if you know what a mule is, you can't believe in mules and not believe in their parents. So if someone believes in demigods, they gotta believe in the gods. And so he says, Meletus, foolish, sad Meletus, has once again contradicted himself. So, Socrates' reason there. Now, so Socrates ends up concluding that Meletus cannot prove the impossible. The impossible would be that, you believe in the divine, superior beings, but not believe in gods, demigods, and heroes. And so, basically says Meletus is putting forward an impossible charge. Socrates doesn't believe in, the gods, but he believes in the demigods, so it can't be right. And so the charge against Socrates, as Socrates sees it, doesn't hold. So kind of Meletus' problem here is, you should have picked one or the other. You can't, well, you can, but if you're going to accuse someone of being an atheist, and then say they believe in like demigods or spiritual stuff, that's not going to work logically. Now again, in a courtroom, maybe people could believe both, because people can believe contradictions. But from a logical standpoint, Meletus is putting forward an impossible charge. So it seems that Socrates is doing pretty well. In the horse trainer analogy, he seems to have shown that Meletus doesn't care about the kids. And the unintentional argument, Meletus doesn't care about the kids. And in the, talking about the charge of atheism, that Meletus doesn't understand basic logic. So it seemed that in terms of logic points, Socrates is winning. So everything's going to go great. Now, Socrates realizes, of course, that he's operating under the threat of death. But he claims, interestingly enough, that, and weirdly enough, that to be afraid of death is to pretend to have wisdom, which is normally kind of an odd thing. Because if someone's like afraid of death, would you say to them, you know, suppose you're on a plane, you look out the window and like the engine's on fire, and someone's like, crap, I'm afraid to die. Would you turn to them and say, you have but a pretense of wisdom? Probably not. You're probably like, ah, the engine's on fire. So why would he say that this is the pretense of wisdom? Well, what he claims is this, that if you're afraid of death, then you would claim that you actually know that death is, yeah, something to be afraid of. That death is something bad. And if you don't know that death is something to be afraid of, then in Socrates claims it'd be foolish to be afraid of it, supposedly, as he sees it. Now, Socrates claims to not know what happens after death. Although, as we'll see, that he does argue a bit about it, but he claims that he doesn't know if it's going to be bad. Now, as I mentioned back in the ancient days of last week, Socrates ends up on trial, goes to trial, then ultimately drinks the hemlock, because he believes that he's going to deal with the state. He, was born in Athens. They, raised him. He lived there, and so he believes he has a contract, and that he's got to stick with the state and obey the laws. With one exception, though. He says, if they offer him, freedom, they say, Socrates, stop doing this and walk away. He says he can't do that. That's the one thing that he can't do. Well, one thing he won't do, because as he sees it, he's on a mission from the gods to find out who is the wisest, to disprove the gods. Mm-hmm. And so he thinks that he's got to keep doing this. And if they tell him to, it's the one thing he can't do. Well, there's a lot of things he can't do, but this is one thing he'll refuse. So, in addition to the mission from God, why else would he refuse this? Oh, presents another analogy. He really likes them. And in this case, he presents himself as a gadfly. And there's another horse in the analogy. In this case, instead of the youth being like the horses, the state is the horse. And this is what he claims. He claims that the horse, metaphorically speaking, is like a horse. And it just wants to eat some oats, but not too many, because that gives them gas. And you learn that on the NPRs, like these about minutes. They said, you can't give your horse too many oats, or they'll get like all bloaty and die. And it's like, I don't want horses to die. That'd be terrible. Who knew that oats could be so dangerous? You got to give them like some grass and stuff. So Socrates is right. Horses are difficult to keep from dying. That's why dogs are good. They can eat almost anything, so they're mostly okay, mostly anything. So the horse just wants to eat and just kind of get lazy and not do anything. And Socrates sees himself as the gadfly that goes and stings the horse of the state and makes it, when it wants to just kind of, lounge around eating oats and grass and not roaming around, then it makes it, get alert and go out there and do its stuff. And he sees himself as offering an important role, because otherwise the state would be just, out of shape. So metaphorically, he's the gadfly stinging the horse of the state or biting it, and he sees himself as his role. So why is he out there, kind of tweaking the politicians and artisans and questioning them? Well, he sees that as a mission from God, that his job is, when they're not doing their jobs, they're not doing what they're supposed to and not being, honorable, etc. His job is to, kind of sting them, so they, in front of everyone, so they get back to doing what they're supposed to. So if the politicians are supposed to be, running the state, Athens, for the benefit of the good of the people, and they're not doing it, then his job is to sting them and get them on course. Now, in general, the people in power like being stung in this way, having their misdeeds presented. Yeah, for example, was Donald Trump super excited when Bob Woodward's book, Fear, talking about the Trump administration? Did he like to buy this book? No, he wasn't too happy because it makes him seem bad. Similar when the op-ed was released, I think just a little while ago. It was released, being critical of him, he didn't like that. And when anybody's critical, he lashes out at him. And it's typical of, most people in power is they don't like to be criticized. So why do they like being criticized? Well, in general, even people who don't have power, do they like being criticized? No, so it's a general human thing. People generally don't like people telling them, hey, you're doing a terrible job, especially when it's true. True. Yeah, which goes to the next question. Are there cases when people like when they're given the critical evaluation? Yeah, what sort of scenarios do people value that?
In the workforce.
Yep. Yeah. Sometimes when they're working, so it's something, not like you're doing a terrible job, you're fired, but here's how we can improve things. What about in sports? Yeah, because if someone, a big part of coaching is figuring out what someone's doing wrong, like their form when hitting the racket, hitting the ball with the racket, or running or something, and if a coach didn't point out mistakes, then the person would never improve. Yeah, so there are many cases where someone being critical can be positive. And a lot, as a practical matter, a lot depends how someone approaches it. Because one thing saying, here's how you get, you're doing good, but here's how you get better, as opposed to just, saying horrible things. Now, today, going back to politics, who's supposed to be the people that are the gadfly, that are supposed to keep the state, the government from, well, in Socrates' view, being kind of lazy or doing awful things? Well, ideally, yeah, because we have a check and balance system. Part of it is the government. We have supposedly the Congress and the president and the Supreme Court are supposed to keep each other kind of in check. Who else is supposed to do it? Yeah, the people are supposed to, the democracy is supposed to say, hey, probably shouldn't be doing that. And who sees themselves as having this role? Who does Trump hate more than most? Yeah, the media. The mainstream media, the fake news. Yeah, so their job in a way would be like Socrates' gadfly role. Their goal is their role doing what maybe consider sort of the ideal role of journalism is to expose those problems, at the higher and lower levels. And as one practical matter, one thing that's happened as newspaper budgets have collapsed because advertising is switched more to Google and Facebook and away from local small town newspapers, is that a lot of them are folding. And one implication that they had, which I hadn't really thought about but makes sense, is that pretty much the only people that would go to town meetings is locals who are really concerned, and the local press. They would go and actually see what's going on. And it's amazing how much corruption happens at the local level. I mean, it's not like billions of dollars, but what the places where people are just funneling all the money themselves and not doing anything. Yeah. So one concern about the funding of newspapers, the news, independent news, is that if we don't have independent newspapers, researchers, etc., that people will just be able to get away with all kinds of stuff, and no one will know until maybe never, or way after the fact. And so one practical concern we have today is that, how do we keep people who have access to money and power, how do we keep them from doing terrible stuff? And Trump is, from his standpoint, is right about this. The media are always, people like Bob Woodward and other people in the press, they're always exposing things that people in power do. And of course they want to say it's fake news, etc. But the main thing that keeps them on check is getting out in the newspapers or into the web. And so one of our challenges in the 21st century as a democracy is who is going to be the gadfly of the future? You know, because yeah, some people you can kind of trust, but do we want people just being able to do whatever they want? And so it's no surprise that Trump is called the media the enemy of the people, which I never thought I'd hear an American president ever say that. But hey, eventually I guess you'll hear everything. And talking about fake news and strengthening, changing the libel laws, etc. And so again, a place where philosophy kind of hits practicality is who should be the gadfly and who's going to be doing it. And this all, of course, also ties into social media and companies like Google, because their business is, of course, making money. And the goal of Facebook, well, is Facebook's goal to keep the state in check, to serve, that purpose. No, their job is to make money. And there have been accusations that Facebook and Google have been silencing people on the right. Which, Socrates' point would apply there as well. If that were true, then that would be of concern. Because if there are people on the right who are pointing out the misdeeds of people on, say, the left, then silencing them would be, because it's not the people on the left are like all good people, just like the people on the right are all bad people. And so that'd be a point of concern. So we'll see what the future brings until 2024 when Google kills us all. Now another politically important question is this. If you consider there to be problems in the system, and there pretty much always is, because no systems are perfect, but of course there are systems that are really bad and parts that are really bad. A good question is, if you want to change it, how do you do that? What's the way to do that? Now, historically, of course, there's been a variety of options. Some include, of course, violent overthrow and revolution, like we did to the Brits. The French did to their own king. Theirs was pretty messy. They killed like everybody. That was pretty bloody. Took a little too far. Too far, French guys. Too far. Then the other option, of course, is working within the system and not like killing lots of people. And if you're going to work kind of within the system, one question is, do you like get into political office, or do you do something else? And this concern, goes way back to Socrates and before. Now, Socrates claims that if you're going to fight for the right, perhaps to pardon, he claims if you're going to leave even briefly, you must not be doing it like in public office, but do it kind of like behind the scenes. Now, in Socrates' time, and even our time today in some places, politics is often done by killing people. And even today, some places do it by killing people. Like Vladimir Putin, he's all about killing people. Now, in the United States, suppose you're like on the far left and agitating for like free college, or on the far right agitating for white nationalism. Is it likely that you would be assassinated?
For free college?
Probably not for free college. Maybe though. Yeah, typically, even if you're advocating for the overthrow of capitalism, probably wouldn't be assassinated, because it's, for the most part, even though there were assassinations in the '60s, assassination is really not how America does politics, with some notable exceptions. It's pretty, relative to other countries, it's pretty rare. We save all our violence for each other with like guns and stuff, but even that's pretty high. Now, of course, today, so people could go into politics without really super worrying about being assassinated. Because if you take like all the politicians we've had, the number assassinated, it's pretty low. It's a pretty safe job, being like fishing in Alaska, way more dangerous. So today we don't really have to worry about like the death part. Then we come to the question of practicality. So if you really want to change the system, should you work like go for public office, or should you do something, outside? Now, some years back, the great political philosopher Sarah Palin, she had a Socratic moment. She used to be the governor of Alaska, and she resigned. I remember watching it, and in her own Sarah Palin way, she was presenting Socrates' argument. Anybody remember Sarah Palin? Yeah. She hasn't resurfaced in a while. She used to be on Fox occasionally. But what she said was that she was the governor of Alaska, and a one-time VP candidate was John McCain, and she said that she resigned her office after 2 years, as a 4-year term, and her argument was that she couldn't achieve her goals in politics as governor, that she had to leave office and do something else, and she went on Fox News. And then she's never heard from him. Hadn't heard from him in a while, quite a while. But then she made that argument. Now, there are people who make that argument and are quite effective. For example, take the Koch brothers, not the brothers who do cocaine, but the Koch brothers, who may do cocaine or not. I don't know. I'm not going to judge them in that regard. Everybody's got hobbies. So, do the Koch brothers have a lot of influence? Yeah. What offices have they held? Yeah, none. Their view is, why hold office when you can why hold one office when you can buy, all of it. Same like George Soros. Yeah, I think it's George. He's on the liberal side. He's the devil of the conservatives. They always bring up, George Soros is taking over stuff, and he's a billionaire liberal, and as far as I know, he hasn't really held office, but he funds, Democrats. So the Koch, if you're liberal, the Koch brothers are your own money demons, and if you're a conservative, George Soros is the money demon. And there are others, other billionaires in the background as well that get involved in politics, quite openly. Yeah, there are, another example is, you might have heard of astroturfing. If you do, not only like in football stadiums. Anybody heard of astroturfing in politics? What you do basically is you have a cause, but suppose I own a company that, like a factory farming company, and suppose the Humane Society is like getting on me because I'm keeping my pigs in like really small cages and chopping up my chicken beaks and stuff, doing bad things, and I'm like, crap, the Humane Society is getting all over me. What can I do? Now, if I go on TV and say, hey, look, I just want to make money and the Humane Society is getting on my back, so vote against them. Are people going to go, oh, that poor rich guy, he's not making enough? That's not going to work. So what I would do is astroturf. I would hire a company to create a fictional group, like Americans for Responsible Farming, somebody that's name. And what they would do is they would create commercials weirdly attacking the Humane Society, criticizing them, perhaps with a talking dog. I'm actually not making this up. This is a real thing that happened. And they'd have an ad with a talking dog, talking about how terrible the Humane Society is. And the idea being is that people would, see the commercials, and then if there's some, they give less money to the Humane Society, and they'd have less money to spend against me. Another example is when they're proposing taxes on soft drinks, etc. The soft drink companies, they're not going to come out and say, hey, we don't want to pay more. We want to make money, so we don't want any taxes on our soft drinks. They would create a company like Americans for healthy consumption of beverages, and they do a commercial where someone would they'd have like a housewife, middle-income housewife, talking about how it would be a terrible burden to pay 1 more cent on soda, how it would break their family. They'd be forced to live in the street. Not like that. And these are all real things. And so with astroturfing, if people knew what they were doing, then they wouldn't be that effective. So they operated anonymously. So in a way you could say Socrates was right. One way, if you really want to have a ton of influence in politics, is to be behind the scenes with lots of, well, he didn't mean the money part, but lots of money. Now Socrates himself thought he could do it by being logical, etc. But he does raise a good point. So if there are things you want to, well, Socrates of course is looking at it ethically. If you want to make things that are bad better, is he right? Would you be better off like running for office, or are you better off being in the background, doing all like with big money like Soros or Koch, or with like clever stuff like Karl Rove. He used to be called Bush's brain. And it was, Obama had a guy, he had his own kind of Karl Rove guy. David Axelrod, I think. He was like smart. I mean, Obama was pretty smart, but he also had like another smart guy to help him with doing even smarter things. And so, they didn't call him Obama's brain because he had one of his own. The Bush, I guess, needed Karl Rove. And so maybe the place is like kind of like behind the throne, not the king, but the hand of the king. Didn't work out so well for Ned Stark, but I guess that is to stay out of sword range. So kind of an interesting point. If you're thinking of like influencing politics, a thought to have. Do you go for the office, or do you do stuff more in the background? So Socrates has finished his defense, such as it is, and they put it to a vote. And of course, he is found guilty of the charges. Although, logically, he's probably made his case, maybe.
Guilty of what charges? Like all of them?
All of them, across the board. You know, making the worse a better cause.
Unintentional.
Yeah, probably the ones he added too. They probably like, yeah, we'll throw that in there too. Unintentional corrupter, you know, sole corrupter, all the corruptors. Yeah, so he's found guilty of all the, I guess, all the things, all counts of stuff. Now, of course, because the way the voting goes, and if anybody's considering a career in law, you win not by having, say, the logically best case, because someone could dispassionately go through and look at the argument and say, well, logically, yes, you know, this is the case. What matters is the way the jury votes. Now, ideally, of course, you'd want it to be that the jury looks dispassionately and without, you know, being swayed by their emotions. They look at the evidence and say, is the weight of evidence and the quality of argumentation such that the prosecution has established logically beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is guilty. And it's basically essentially a matter of logic. The quality of the reasoning, quality of the evidence, should you accept it as essentially a very strong, extremely strong inductive argument beyond all reasonable doubt. But of course, as a practical matter, they don't like, you know, query the jury like, you know, show us your work, you know, and the logical proof. It's just you go by the vote. And so, if you're, you know, considering going to law, knowing like how to sway the jury and also picking the jury. One thing that experienced lawyers will say is you often kind of win or lose the case in how you pick the jury, and you have to look at like how are people likely to vote and how are people likely to be swayed. And I've been pulled in for jury duty a lot, but they always, as soon as they find out what I do, they just like, the first time they're like, what do you do? And I'm like, I'm a philosophy professor, and both lawyers are like, look at each other and are like, no, do not want this guy. I was like, come on, I know all the logics. And I actually wanted to be on the jury. It's a fascinating civil rights case. So Socrates guilty on all the guilty counts.
Do you think they came to that verdict based on emotion and not really logic?
Yeah.
Thinking logically?
Yeah, because it would seem that given what he argued,
Yeah, good argument.
yeah, it would seem that he does show that he probably is not a corrupter. Like the charge of atheism doesn't seem to hold. But probably the way he did it, because he really wasn't like defending himself. He was basically just sort of, he was doing more of the same. You know, he's like showing Melitus to be an idiot again.
So was it not like a jury of his peers, or like a jury of everybody that was mad at him anyway?
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because his people, he already kind of, you know, a lot of, he antagonized quite a few people. So. Yeah, it's a good idea always, again, with a jury, a practical thing is go in and, you know, don't antagonize them. Because some years back I had a student who was going, to a trial, and he asked if I'd read his opening statement and check through it. And it began really by insulting the judge and jury members. I'm like, do not open with that. I'm like, do you want to make a statement or do you want to win? It's like, well, I kind of want to win. It's like, don't.
Yeah.
You don't want to start off insulting the judge, because that's not going to go well. So now the phase is over that he has been found guilty. The next phase is sentencing. Now, typically in most courts today, the jury votes, you know, guilty or innocent. And they can, in some cases, decide like, okay, you know, we'll vote on like death penalty or not death penalty. And usually then they give recommendations. But usually the sentencing is typically done by the judge. They will say like, you know, in the criminal cases, this is what the penalty is. Now, Socrates proposes that he be put up at the Prytaneum. Essentially what that is in Greek history, if you won like equivalent like today would say like a gold medal if you were in the Olympics, if you were an Olympic champion, like you know like Michael Phelps or someone, you would be put up in this place, and you know just a great wonderful place. It'd be like today it'd be like someone you know being accused of a crime, found guilty, and said, for my punishment, mansion. I want to be punished by being put up in a mansion. It's like so because Socrates sees that he's been doing this great service. He's been this gadfly helping people, and his punishment should be this great reward. And then everyone, of course, in the jury, you know, the audience goes nuts, you know, when he makes that proposal. And his friends go nuts too. They're like, "What are you doing?" And so they're like, "Socrates, you know," and they say, propose that he pay a fine. And they basically pull all their money and say he'll pay a sum of money, and he puts that as the option. Now, Meletus puts up death. So at this point, the option is death or a fine. So at this point, many of the experts think that they probably would have been like, okay, you know, fine, literally. But Socrates, of course, keeps talking. And probably if he's a defense attorney, his defense attorney would be like, at this point, this is when you should stop talking. Now, he is not really much interested in the fine. He basically just proposes, you know, some tiny amount. It'd be like someone sentenced to death and they say, well, you know, pay like $5. How's that? I'm gonna get like $5 in my pocket, maybe 6. Now, so he insults them some more. He says that many people go before the court and they'll say anything to avoid being punished. They'll drag in, you know, the family and stuff. And Socrates would say he'd rather die than do that, even if he could live. Because, and this insults him even more, the difficulty, he says, the challenge is not to avoid dying, because everybody dies. The challenge is to avoid being unrighteous. So and he brings up another like metaphor. He says being older, he is caught by the slower pursuer, death. And the faster pursuer of righteousness, well, you know, can't catch him, which is kind of a weird metaphor. But basically what he's saying is, because yeah, that doesn't work terribly well. But basically what he's saying is that you can't, no matter what you do, you're going to die. You know, that's how every story ends, and then they die. And so you can't, that's unavoidable. The only thing within your power is to choose whether you're good or bad. Because unfortunately, like on the options, preferences, there's no, you can't uncheck like the death box. It's like, but the evil box, you know, you can choose to check the evil box or not. And so Socrates says, you know, he's given a choice. He can't avoid dying, but he can avoid being bad. And he thinks that what he's doing is going to avoid him being bad. So he's not going to do anything wrong, even to avoid death, because he knows that he'll still die. And so it's better to die without, it's better to die for doing the right thing, because you're going to die anyways, than to do the wrong thing, and then of course you die anyways. Now he speaks of prophecy against his accusers, and it does come true. Do you know why it comes true? Yeah, and of course Plato was able to put the prophecy in there because he writes it after it occurs. So like I prophesied that Trump would become president. Ooh, of course it's cheating because it's already happened. Oh, good lightning. Now he claims that by killing him, they're going to come to a bad end, and is what they should do is not go after other people, but improve themselves. And we of course have a saying for this, you know, it's better to, you know, not put out other people's lights, but make your own brighter, type of thing. And he prophesizes that eventually they'll all come to a bad end. And in fact, they do. But of course, again, Plato knows how the story ends, so he writes it in there. And they do all come to a bad, do all come to a bad end. Now, Socrates, another reason as to why he's not, worried here is because he hears voices. Famously, Socrates had a little internal voice, what he calls his internal oracle, that would tell him what to do. A few years back, there was a New York Times best-selling book written by someone who was writing about voices that people heard. But instead of the usual, typically when we hear someone hearing voices, we think of like the Son Sam, people that are like murderers, the voices tell them to kill people. What we don't hear about, though, is there are many more people who have little voices that tell them to do the right thing. Because it doesn't make the news. Voices tell someone to kill people. They kill people, it gets in the news. Voices tell someone to be kind to others, or brush their teeth. That doesn't make the news. So Socrates had a little voice in his head that told and warned him about stuff. Now, the person who wrote this book, and of course they mentioned Socrates, and what inspired them to write it was that their father heard voices in his head too. But the voices always told him to do good things. So I guess if you're going to hear voices, those are the voices to hear. And she made the argument that in a way we all hear voices in our head telling us to do stuff. It's kind of like, everyone's seen like in the cartoons or TV shows, like when someone's making a tough decision, like a little devil, a little angel appears and starts whispering to them. And we kind of do this ourselves. We hear kind of the lure of doing a bad thing, and kind of the words are doing the right thing. And so he claims that his voice, who has never failed him, didn't tell him to stop talking. So essentially saying my little voice in my head is telling me I'm doing the right thing. So he keeps going for it. Now, of course, being a philosopher, it's not enough just to hear voices. That's, of course, a big part of it. But he also is going to have some arguments to this effect. And he claims that death is nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. Now, what he presents here is an argument of the form that's known as a dilemma. And, the die part is for not, it happens to be about death, but it's not for dying. That's about two. Now, a dilemma is, in the proper form, is a valid deductive argument. Kind of the one kind of standard form is so kind of the standard dilemma, at least put as a deductive argument, is if P then R, if Q then R, P or Q, those are your two options, therefore R. So if it was like if you take the final, you pass. If you don't take the final, you pass. You'll take it or you don't take it, so you'll pass. And that'd be a dilemma. Now, usually there's like more significant options there, but this is one version of a dilemma. So his friends are, he sentenced to death, and his friends are, like sad because Socrates is going to die. Now, interestingly, when they vote, more people vote to kill him than voted to convict him. So they're like, gosh, I guess they really antagonize them. They're like, kill that guy. I don't think he's guilty, but definitely you got to kill him. So what's his argument as to why you shouldn't fear death? Well, presents this dilemma. He claims there are two options for death. Option one, death is a state of nothingness, where you just die and you cease to exist. And that was a view, not surprisingly, held by many thinkers. Death is just like you're done. The other option is, which is also popular, is you migrate from this world to another. Now he claims, stealing from another philosopher, that if death is a state of nothingness, it's a great gain. It's no loss. Because he says eternity is like a single night, a dreamless sleep from which you never awake, And another philosopher made the argument, if you don't exist, you have nothing to fear because you can't suffer. You won't be there to suffer at all, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Nothing bad can happen to you because you won't be around anymore. Now, of course, it could be countered that, you know, being not existing anymore could be something to be afraid of. The second option, as he sees it, he envisions like a heaven-like option. He goes to a better place, the good place, and the real good place, and he gets to talk with all these, you know, great, you know, heroes, etc. And he can philosophize all day without being put to death because he's already dead, and that's the best. So what he says is basically, either you don't exist anymore, so nothing to worry about, or, you know, in modern terms, you go to heaven. That's nothing to worry about. So death is nothing to fear. Now the argument is, of course, it's a valid argument, because if P gets you R and Q gets you R, and you've got only these two options, then that has to be, that conclusion follows. So why do people still worry about death? If Socrates presented a valid argument, you know, saying death is nothing to fear. Well, there's valid, and of course there's sound. And sound means that it's valid, which this is, but it also means all the premises are true. Now, what's going wrong in Socrates' argument? Well, what he's doing here, at least according to critics, is presenting what's called a false dilemma. The problem is here. A false dilemma is a fallacy when someone presents two choices as if they're the only two choices, but there's actually others. Now usually the way it works is, here's the two choices, there's only two, this one's terrible, so you accept this one. But Socrates is saying, these are the only two choices, they're both great, so you have nothing to worry about. Now, a false dilemma arises when there's actually a third or fourth or fifth option, which is not brought up. So could there be another option that Socrates doesn't mention that would be something to fear? Yeah, hell. Yeah, because it could be, he leaves out, even if you believe in an afterlife, maybe it won't be a good one, maybe it won't be the good place, it will be the bad place, the really bad place. Or it could be something like reincarnation, where you get reincarnated, maybe it's based random. You come back as like a banana slug. Or maybe it's based on merit. You come back as something, you know, awful. Or maybe it's like, there's an episode of the Tales from the Crypt, where after you die, you're dead, but you're still in your body, you're still aware. So you can feel like all, like it ends with the person's getting an autopsy and the bone saws coming through their face. Yeah. And the worst part is after that, you know, once they're in the ground, they're just laying there, you know, decaying forever, just staring at dirt forever. Yeah, so you can think of a lot of things that would be bad. So, false dilemma. Okay, Wednesday, of course, I got the ILAC meeting, which is over in the architecture building. If you really like committee meetings, we'll go over in committee. Then I'll see you, otherwise I'll see you on the Friday. Oh, normal office hours Wednesday, but it's a different software meeting. Then I'll see you on the Friday.